My brother went on another trip funded by our parents while I was stuck at home doing his chores. But I wasn't just going to sit there and let it slide. I was going to expose everything. You see, ever since we were kids, I've always played it straight. Good grades, never ruffled feathers, did what was expected, but he gets to be the wild child taking off every summer while I'm cleaning up his messes. Last week, I'm looking at my phone while cleaning up after his latest family dinner, and I see pictures of his latest trip to hiking in the mountains, compliments pouring in from mom and dad about how adventurous he is. I'm so angry. I want to scream, but I don't. Instead, I bury it down because that's what I do. It's just easier to play the martyr, right? After dinner, I overheard my parents chatting in the other room. They were saying how proud they are of my brother for having the guts to live life. It hit me hard. Why was it that every ounce of ambition and all my dreams got pushed aside? Never mind that I aced my exams and got accepted into this amazing art program. I don't even think they know I applied. My parents' idea of good enough revolves around traditional success, law, medicine, something stable, while they throw money and lavish praise at him for getting lost in some foreign country. It's infuriating. So I decide to do some digging. I start keeping track of all the trips, gifts, and even the support they throw his way while I'm left hanging. I want proof. I need to show them how this favoritism is tearing me apart. That's my plan. But the thing is, they're not going to like what I find out. Last week, I got my hands on a bank statement while cleaning up our shared living space. They'd given him $3,500 for a trip to Europe last month, and how was I going to compete with that? When I confronted him about it, he just brushed me off, telling me I was too sensitive. Classic gaslighting. It's as if he thinks I'm the crazy one for wanting to stand up to their favoritism. I mean, getting the short end of the stick was no longer just some teenage drama, it was real life. And seeing him flash that stupid smile, all carefree while I was hauling around his laundry, made me feel small. It's time I took a stand. But how? The next day, as our parents were busy fawning over his success from the latest trip, I made my plan. I opened a folder, the proof folder. I had all the bank statements, pictures of him flashing his fancy vacation stuff, and even some records of things he borrowed from our parents, like my art supplies. I felt a little sick, but also a little powerful, like I finally held the cards. Little did I know, pulling this off would be an emotional roller coaster, because the deeper I dug, the more rubbish I found. But I was ready to confront them and reveal all of it. Something was about to explode, and they wouldn't see it coming. I decided that I needed to figure out exactly what was going on in my family, so I turned to my brother's social media, the place where he flaunts his privilege. I didn't want the usual family photo look-through. I was hunting for dirt. One evening, I was scrolling through his posts, my blood boiling over every glorified smile. Then I noticed something odd. In one of his travel photos at a fancy restaurant, there was a receipt casually displayed beside his plate. The date wasn't even from his latest trip. It was 2 months earlier, during a time when he said he was too busy to hang out with the family. That didn't add up. If he was supposedly home then, how did he rack up an expense in another state? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more sinister happening, something even my parents didn't know about. My gut told me this was worth investigating, so I rallied my cousin to help. Initially, I thought she'd be on my side, supporting me in digging up the truth. I explained my suspicions regarding my brother's fake narratives and what I discovered with the restaurant receipt. But instead of being angry alongside me, she seemed skeptical, asking if I was sure I wasn't just being the jealous sibling. I mean, what? It seemed that the peacemaker role was a tough gig. She tried to keep the peace, telling me I should just focus on my own goals rather than tearing down my brother. It was like a wake-up call. Even family could judge me based on their delusions and ideas of loyalty instead of what's true. In a moment of weakness, I realized she might just be another voice of their enablers. With that disheartening realization, I sensed I needed more proof. Late one night, I flipped through the shared family calendar, trying to see if anything stuck out. That's when I noticed it. There was a family trip planned next month, and I was not invited. But my brother had planned his birthday dinner on the same weekend. Then it hit me like a ton of bricks. The whole trip was just a cover. They were throwing him a party in a private place for his friends and making it seem like a family affair. I thought, are they seriously using family time to celebrate someone who seems to do nothing but party? And I sat there in complete disbelief. The next morning, I executed my plan. I called my parents nonchalantly to ask about the trip, and that's when my mother slipped up. She casually mentioned how the dinner was just for close family. But I pushed. Imagine the surprise on my brother's face when he sees this surprise with his college buddies instead. But by the time I asked her about it, she brushed me off, insisting I was overthinking things. But a few minutes after I hung up, I caught my dad whispering to her, and the moment hung awkwardly in the air. She shot me a look that sealed it. They were in on something together. I felt that sinking feeling in my gut, knowing I was about to crack something wide open, but at what cost? This was spiraling fast. After feeling blindsided by everything that was going on, I stepped up my digging because I couldn't shake the gut feeling that my brother was pulling something over the family's heads. I decided to pull an old trick out of my bag. I began going through the stuff he left behind in our shared area, particularly his old school notebooks, looking for any clues he might have missed. Sounds lame, I know, but hear me out. Sometimes guys write stuff they shouldn't in random places, especially when they think no one is looking. To my surprise, I found meticulous notes about business plans he'd written during those months he was supposedly traveling. I felt my heart racing. It read more like a vacation itinerary than a real plan, but it raised a major red flag. Something told me that this was way beyond just feeding himself with travel stories. He was hiding something huge. But of course, I realized if I show that to my parents, it would backfire completely. So I pocketed it, knowing knowledge is power. At this point, I needed somebody on my side. I thought I could get my cousin on board again for support since she seemed to get it after the last conversation. But nope, this time she accused me of being paranoid, seriously. So much for that alliance. She called me out on being vindictive and told me families have their ups and downs, implying I should just suck it up. Classic enabling behavior. I mean, come on. This was about my mental well-being and my future, and yet here I was being painted as the villain for wanting to expose the truth. It shook me a bit. It stung, realizing how entrenched her loyalty was. I had thought she'd understand, but she just wanted to keep the peace, even at my expense. Just when I thought my efforts would get tossed aside, I gathered my nerve and decided to check if there were any credit card bills that might lead to more revelations. The next day, I cornered my parents. I came clean that I'd been looking through the family finances. Totally not a great way to start a conversation. But it was me or them, right? I found 2 recent transactions that booked him flights and hotel rooms, travel arrangements overlapping the same days as family celebrations. I asked my mom about it, and her face went pale. This was it. She claimed they were for other important engagements, but I pushed, realizing she slipped into a defensive mode. It was like I'd struck a nerve. The tension filled the room. This was the turning point I had been waiting for, but it felt monumental. I could almost see the cracks forming in their unspoken loyalty toward him. I knew I was inching closer, and while they were clearly hiding something, how much were they hiding? With renewed spirit, I put my next plan in motion. I decided to confront my brother directly. Knowing he'd probably deflect or gaslight me like before, I set up an outing under the usual guise of catching up. But boy, was I ready for an explosion. During what was supposed to be a casual dinner, I laid it all out, broaching topics about his trips, expenses, and family gatherings he'd missed. Instantly, he went on the offensive, dismissing everything as overthinking it. As I pressed on, digging deeper, I could sense panic creeping back into his tone. But just then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my mom calling. I answered in haste, thinking she'd received the details of the family trip. But no. She dropped a bomb, telling me she had just received a call about one of my old art pieces. Turns out it had been sold, but the buyer was supposedly someone we both knew. I hung up quickly, caught between 2 high-stakes moments, wondering if that could be a connection. Now, I was facing 2 explosive revelations at once. My brother's double life and an unearthed mystery behind my own art. How do they all connect? I felt the tension mount. Something was about to break. After all the digging and uncovering, I finally decided it was time to take some serious action. I spent days organizing everything I had. Emails, social media prints, the notes from my brother, and yes, the bank statements. I felt the pressure this time. I set up a family dinner, and of course, it was all about our brother, which made my skin crawl. But I had a plan. I would extract the truth right under their noses while keeping my composure. Somehow, I was going to expose how much they missed the truth while praising him like some golden child. As dinner went on, I could see my brother basking in the attention, laughing and recounting his latest escapades, and I wanted to scream. Once the moment felt just right, I stood up, my heart racing. I pulled out my folder, the infamous proof folder. The looks on their faces as I slid down the documents one by one was priceless. I started recounting the money, summarizing all the receipts I had found, the proof of flights overlapping with family trips, and emails that clearly indicated his misrepresentation of his escapades. My hands were shaking, but I pressed on, forcing them to understand that their loyalty was being misused. What I didn't expect was my brother's reaction. As I continued detailing everything, he shifted from calm to defensive, accusing me of trying to sabotage him. It was like a veil lifting. Seeing him scramble, hearing the cracks in his bravado as he threw insults back and forth. My parents watched in shock, completely speechless. Eventually, my mom couldn't hold back anymore. She dropped the facade, admitting that they'd been supporting him for appearances. Her tears flowed as she admitted to a deep-seated fear that haunted them, the fear that they'd failed to be the perfect family in front of everyone else. I didn't know whether to be angry or to feel pity. This had gone far beyond sibling rivalry. We were the imperfect family, but his facade was coming crumbling down. With everything revealed, I pushed harder, demanding to know about the art piece that had supposedly sold and why he never told me about it. As the tension rose, my mom finally cracked, revealing that my brother had been using the art I had poured my heart into as collateral for one of his business ventures, his attempts to fund his travels under the guise of being a creative entrepreneur. The information hit me like a truck. My own dreams were collateral damage in his endless quest for validation. It felt like the ground dropped beneath my feet. All this time, my hard work and talent had been exploited, and it was all happening right under our parents' noses. As the air thickened with disbelief, I had accomplished what I set out to do. I had forced the secret to the surface. But what happened next? My brother began yelling how he never wanted to be seen as the bad guy, that none of it was his fault, that all of us had swiftly painted him into that villain role. I was shaken. Everything spiraled. I couldn't believe we ended up here. With every voice getting louder, emotions boiling, and truth spilled, it felt like a ticking time bomb about to explode. Someone had to pay the price for all the invisible wounds we inflicted on each other. But this time it was all real, and we had to face the consequences of our actions. Didn't we? After the dinner chaos and all the revelations, everything changed. My parents were left in shock, and the air was thick with accusations spiraling from our confrontation. My mom just sat there, tears rolling down her face, processing how it all came crashing down. My dad, usually the peacekeeper, was quiet, watching as we threw everything at each other. My brother's eyes were wild, going from angry to desperate as he tried to convince them I was the villain. Honestly, I'd never felt so torn. I called out to him, asking how he could turn this all around on me when he had exploited our family bond for his reckless pursuits. That fight suddenly had layers I never expected. The next week was awkward, to say the least. My mother wouldn't look at me, and my dad tried to bring up normal family dinners, but it felt forced. I didn't feel like part of the family anymore. The dynamic had shifted completely. Now, my brother wasn't just the golden child, he was the wounded one. I found myself playing the scapegoat role again, only this time it felt heavier because of the emotional wreckage left behind. Then, my cousin, the one who didn't understand my situation, confronted me. I thought she might back me up after everything, but no. Instead, she insisted that family is supposed to stick together, no matter what. Too bad they never showed that to me. She didn't get it, how hard it was to live under my brother's shadow, and her siding with him hurt deeply. That's when I realized not everyone is going to choose me in this family. The loyalty I wanted wasn't there anymore. I felt like I was the outsider now. Reflecting on it all, I couldn't help but replay everything in my head. That fight wasn't just about my brother being favored. It was about my identity, my dreams, and what I pursued versus what they deemed acceptable. I knew I had crossed a line, but what choice did I have? I'd spent my life being painted as the villain, and for once I had fought back, but the cost had been high. Weeks later, I started to distance myself even more. I focused on my art. I wanted to build something real without their shadows looming over me. As I immersed myself in my projects, I couldn't shake the feeling that our family was still hurting. There were still mysteries I needed to untangle, like what else my brother had kept hidden. Somehow, it felt like I had just chipped the surface of something much deeper. And the fallout, that weight wasn't just shedding, it remained lingering in the background, making me wonder if we could ever heal. I had stood up for myself, but realized family's scars often run deeper than any of us can see.